6.1's MSQ is this comfy little Newfound Adventure. All we did was go looking for some treasure, find a little bit more than we bargained for, and then do a little bit of a science experiment. But what it actually was an absolute feast for those thinking about what's to come next in the game. There are so many little bits and pieces to pick up, and plenty of very obvious inspirations to dig into. So, where are we going? What are we doing? What's going to happen? Well, in short, the answers there are the 13th, rescuing a dragon, but also saving the world again, and Estinian's going to die / at least maybe have a fake out. There's a lot to get into, so let's go. With the discovery of a void gate in Asdal's legacy, the tragic reveal of Vitra and Azdaya's backstory, and the meanwhile cutscenes being a cool way to separate the player and character knowledge, it's now quite certain that we're a few steps into the RPG classic of a quick adventure into a new place on an errand that all suddenly gets massively complicated, where we end up having to stop some sort of world-ending threat along the way. Again. This time, it's a whole new threat, and it's one that is directly lifted from Final Fantasy IV. But, let's talk about where we're actually going. That is the Void, the World of Darkness, the 13th Reflection. Now, like with other patch content, we're probably not going to physically go there, like it's a whole new zone or anything. It'll almost certainly be through quick quests, duties, and dungeons, but that's the sort of thing they've always been quite smart about ensuring just makes sense. Anything in there gets corrupted by darkness, and that's of course where our anti-tempering talismans from earlier come in. But again, they're being smart with that. They've already foreshadowed the degradation of those talismans, meaning that we'll probably do a series of quick in-and-out explorations instead. On paper, all we have to do is go in, find Azdaya, bring her home. Easy. But our characters know nothing of the plotting that is going on the other side of that rift, nor the massive amount of Final Fantasy history that hints at what's really going to be going down. So let's talk about that. The Black Knight is the spitting image of Final Fantasy IV's antagonist, Golbez. Look at the round shoulders, the distinctive spike, and, hear that music, it is him. Except it can't literally be him, because Golbez was actually a half-Lunarian under the control of an evil Lunarian who actually wanted to reclaim the world for his people, which basically matches almost nothing of the 13th setup. And most of the Super FF4-inspired stuff about the Ancients and the Moon, well, that clearly went into 6.0's MSQ. But there are some specific things that we can learn, like Golbez's appearance almost spoils Azdaya's fate. It's never explored in FF4, but Golbez for some reason has a shadow dragon that he summons to almost kill the party at one point. I think that then means that Azdaya is almost certainly being set up to become an enemy. Or maybe the writers are going to try to subvert our expectations there, knowing that the parallels will be picked up on. That brings me to the funky news, which is, of course, Estinian. First of all, everything that we've seen of him in 6.1 raises major red flags. He's shown character growth by learning how money works. He has a new motivation after Ultima Thule, and he even went out of his way to help people just to help Vitra. Basically, he's just grown too powerful and well-rounded. Anyway, I bring this up because FF4, of course, features the OG Dragoon, Kain Highwind. He's not literally the first, but he is the one that kind of pioneered the anti-dragon armor and the sort of like edgy, tormented personality to match. Now, Kain spends most of FF4 brainwashed by Golbez, acting as a villain by proxy, which is where the worry comes from. We think Estinian could be en route to getting corrupted himself, probably from attempting to rescue Azdaya. I suppose the Azure Dragoon being willing to die for a dragon would tie up his story in a perfect yet cliched bow. But, of course, they have done something similar with the Nidhogg corruption. Different flavor of corruption, but it still is him acting under strange circumstances. So they could twist what we expect there, knowing that we'll be bringing up this parallel. Of course, thankfully, the writers are, emotionally intelligent, and they're not just going to kill him off, especially if Alphino is not around. But still, I think we could be in for a close call with that character. Especially when they've so flagrantly set up the talismans failing. I mean, you can almost imagine it now, Justinian's talisman gets a bit of the armor chipped off when he does something really cool in a fight, but because he's a stoic moron, he of course doesn't actually tell anybody about it, and, we end up having to do something crazy to save his ass. That's what I'd expect. Of course, though, gotta talk more about the other side, because there's a lot that could be going on. Let's talk about our new villains, these crazy things. So these are obvious references to the 4 arch-fiends from FF4. They each have an element matching one of the traditional Final Fantasy crystals of fire, earth, water, and wind. If nothing else then, this means that we might be in for a bit of an old-school treat. A few patches of tackling the bad guy's henchmen one by one before we eventually fight, the Black Knight himself. Just, don't tell the Throne of Water that the Warrior of Light can actually breathe underwater. Maybe they don't know that. But in all seriousness, these 4 archfiends really weren't that interesting in FF4. They essentially just acted as mini-bosses with a hint of personality. But in the after years, they were shown to have more benevolent sides as well. So there's a bit of room for them to get complex. Now, as of what we know of their plans, well, they've been waiting for an opportunity for 10,000 years. We can then very much assume that's the time since Igyorm, caused the Flood of Darkness, and the Knight in Black talks about setting a war in motion to win redemption for our star. Now, the obvious read here is that the Knight and the Four Fiends wants to fix the 13th. Now, to support this, in the FF series, the 4 elements usually do represent the natural order and balance, and that means that the thrones could be an allegory for the world itself. On top of that then, in FF4 The After Years, we find out that the crystals are in fact memory storage devices. So I think then there's a small chance that these thrones might actually aim to restore the world the way that it was. And I think that's where FF14's strengths can really come into play here. These could be villains of the week who just want to, take over or destroy our world because they're evil, or of course they could be nuanced villains who actually are doing all of this because they want to save their own world, even if it is at the cost of ours, just like Ardbert and co. I'm sure one theoretical solution to restoring the 13th is to rebalance it using all of the non-darkness aether from the source, and that's why the Voidsent are always called aether-starved. Anyway, the writers generally do an amazing job of ensuring villains are the heroes of their own stories, so I very much wouldn't be surprised if it's the same case here and we learn more about these. Remember then, when we last left them in Shadowbringers, Beck Luke, Silva, and Unikali, I think is now the correct pronunciation, they were researching a solution. And then, of course, there's the entire Eden Raid series that was about us learning how to rebalance Aether. Anyway, there's one last major part of the MSQ's teasing that we have not looked at yet. The last big mystery lies in the familiar covered face. Zenos' Voidsent returned to the 13th, and it said some very interesting things. Now, Yoshi P said we would see more of it, but at times we thought maybe that would be, Zenos-related stuff, but he's most definitely not. Their tone in the Famitsu interview is very much that Zenos is dead, gone for good, but this does imply that his history is still going to haunt us. First, we dreamed about this, right? So there's a lot to get into with that. Zenos dreamt of the final days, and now we seem to be dreaming about his Voidsent appearing in the 13th. That's a bit weird. No idea what that is supposed to mean, but it does mean something. And then there's that unresolved line from Van Daniel when he heard of Zenos' dreams, when he said, Emmett Selk must have found a way. Okay, memes about Emmett Selk knowing about how to have babies, babies being made aside, there's a lot of mystery in the circumstances of Zenos' birth. Why is he so big and strong? Is he an artificially enhanced soul, like the Sage job quest explores? Or is it just because he's Emmett's grandson and he was put through a life of rigorous training? We'll probably get the answer someday, but right now, the important thing is that Voidsent. Their full dialogue is this: "And thus I am returned to this world bereft of saviors." Now, the way that the scene is framed, and the way the Voidsent is covering its eyes, the line seems kind of tragic, maybe a bit regretful. We know Unakali was only a kid when it all went down, so he couldn't become a hero to stop it. And like we discussed earlier, the Black Knight wants redemption for their world, which I think is sort of implying that these villains are also potential heroes. While the story of Ardbert and the Warriors of Darkness was heroes being misled into making mistakes, I think the 13th seemed to fall really before anyone could even become a hero. Now, let's take a look at the Voidsent's model. They're covering their eyes, implying maybe a willful blindness, and they have what looks like a partial spiked halo, like a crown of thorns, maybe implying some guilt, maybe some martyrdom. There's lots of possibilities, but the prevailing theory is that this Voidsent is actually the 13th's Azim. For Xenos to have created a pact with it specifically, it must have been one of the strongest around. And of course, Xenos' fetish for the Warrior of Light would attract him straight to that. So with that in mind, let's go on a little bit of a journey. Azim is known for wandering and solving problems, all while making friends and allies along the way. That is what we have been doing, and that is why we've been able to rise to every challenge. But imagine a failed version of that, right? A wanderer who's less about making friends and solving problems, but one who's more about escaping from problems, a almost sort of corrupted version of Azim and Vinaz's ideals. Not opposite, not intentionally alone like Xenos was, but alone by accident. An Azim who couldn't summon friends when they needed to. Maybe this Voidsent is an Azim who was left hopeless by the world and their journey, rather than being emboldened by that, and thus could not rise to the occasion and become the hero. So to me, that sounds like quite a great place for the story to go next. But of course, that is only a theory. What we know for sure is we're going to be dealing with the 13th a lot sooner than perhaps most would have expected, and that's actually really exciting because the setup so far has been absolutely excellent. And there you go. That's it. That's the video. That's what we could pull out of the 6.1 MSQ for where we're going next. It all seems pretty cool, pretty exciting, so let me know what your thoughts are for all of this lore. I hope you found this to be interesting, and we'll see you in the next video.